And I really believe that it's a complex, again, I'm gonna keep saying this too, because there's a lot of people who know the different areas and how to treat it from different ways. So you have a spiritual, you have a brain chemistry, you have a health, but then you also have an economic aspect to it. Yes, public safety is a big concern, but it's all connected to each other. So if we can tackle those root issues of why someone is addicted, chemically or spiritually or biologically addicted, then we can attack our public safety problems. There's also other ones like a drug court. A lot of states, a lot of tribes have implemented traditional rule of law into their court systems and had a drug court. And so how do we do that? And will it be recognized by the state? There's different ways we can navigate this problem. And we just really need to bring everybody together and say, well, I can offer this side of the pie, I could offer this side of the pie, I could offer all these different aspects, and then we come together and have that. That's also with our veterans. PTSD, they have PTSD court. And so they really need to do more of a conservative effort to help people get what they need, but also increase the access to what people need, in not just one way, but many ways. That's how I would deal with it.
Thank you, Puri. Bill.
Do you want me to address the drug problem, or do you want me to talk about gambling? Because I didn't talk about that at all.
Did we pass you up on that?
You did, but that's fine if you don't want me to. It's up to you.
No. You can take them both on.
Okay, I'll do that. Well, at the risk of my friend Maggie attacking me, I'm categorically against gambling. I'll tell you why, because it ruins people's lives. I lived in Spearfish when gambling first came into Deadwood, and the churches, Spearfish, Sturgis, Belfouche, were all scrambling to try to help retired couples who had lost their home, their life savings, their car, everything they had to Deadwood gambling. We had a state legislator sit at our table and give us a promise. If the people of South Dakota will give us $5 bet limits in Deadwood, we'll never ask for any more. Less than 3 years later, she was on the TV in Rapid City saying, Deadwood has to have $100 bet limits to survive. She also told us that the money was going to go to education. Where did that go? My wife didn't see any increase in her salary, and I don't think any others did either. The East Wind Casino has been mentioned. I had a fellow helping me fence a few years ago, and we had worked hard for 4 days fencing, and I was paying him $100 a day. I waited until the end of the 4 days, so I made sure he came to work, and then paid him, and he took that money and gave it to his sister, and she went over to the casino, and by the time he got showered and cleaned up and went over there, why, she'd run it up to $600. So she was pretty happy. And he said, well, go get some groceries with that, and he went back home. By the next morning, she'd lost all of it. Talked about taxes. Like I said, I lived in Spearfish when Deadwood gambling came in. Deadwood and Spearfish are both part of Lawrence County. My taxes tripled because of Deadwood gambling. There's a proverb that says the horse leech has 2 daughters crying, give, give. What that means is evil will never have enough. They're always going to want more. It doesn't matter how much you give them. They're always going to want more. Okay, now let's go to the opioid crisis. This is a symptom. It's not a problem, it's a symptom. And the reason I say that is, like a lot of the other problems, it's a symptom, and I know the nation isn't ready to hear this. You're probably not ready to hear it, but I'm going to say it anyway. It's a symptom of a nation that has turned away from God, that's lost its spirituality. And we can trace that back to the exact time and place that happened. It happened in Baltimore, Maryland, when an atheist woman named Madeline Murray O'Hare got prayer and reading Scripture taken out of the public schools. The Lakota people are a spiritual people. I hear that all the time. And I think part of the problem with drug problems is maybe have lost some of that spirituality. Black Elk said the sacred hoop has been broken. And that's true. But I would contend that the sacred hoop can be repaired. We don't have to give in to hopelessness and despair. I think we can do something about it and get it back to the beginning. It's going to have to be people want it. How bad do we want it? How big is your want to? I heard a story one time about a fellow who spending all his money drinking, and he would get drunk and he would cross the cemetery to get home every night. And finally his wife got fed up with this, and she hired a guy with a backhoe, and he dug a trench across this fellow's path about the length of a grave and about 6 or 7 feet deep. And so this fellow's coming along, tripping through the woods, show me the way to go home, I'm tired of, and he falls in the trench. And he hollers and screams and jumps, and he can't get out. So, I missed a point. First there was a salesman. He falls in the trench. He's not drunk, but he can't get out either. So the drunk comes in and he falls in. And he's trying every way he can to get out of there and can't. And so this salesman, decides he'll have a little fun with him. And he says, "You'll never get out of here alive." But the guy did. His want to got big enough. So it's how much do you want to? I was addicted to cigarettes for 7 years. From the time I was 14 to the time I was 21. The time I got to the point that I quit, I was smoking 4 packs of cigarettes a day. It was the first thing I did in the morning. It's the last thing I did at night. If I woke up at night, I lit another one. It was had such a grip on me. And the only way I quit was throw them away and never touch another one. And that's the way you're going to have to stop it. Throw it away and don't ever touch it again. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Margaret?
I think Bill is my best friend now because he likes to tell stories, and I love stories. So I might be calling him all the time to have him tell me a story. One of the things that I think about in regards to drug use and abuse, I said earlier that I'm from the Oblaya community. And in 1 year's time, in Oblaya community, there was 2 deaths by guns. And then there was a young man who was on drugs or drinking or whatever it was and shot 2 people. And that was just like 2 approaches from me. And so Oblaya community isn't even a very big community. It's one of 6 communities in Porcupine District. In that same year that happened in Oblaya community, when Todd Littlebull was killed, and when that Christianese was killed, down the road, I think it was up on Porcupine Butte, another man was killed because of drugs, because of meth. And we keep asking. I've gone to tribal council. I call Rapid City quite a bit, asking, like, what's going to happen? Do these things go unsolved? What's going to happen? Who cares? Because sometimes it seems like nobody cares. And you have to worry. I have a relative that is younger than me, struggling with meth himself, and came onto my mom's property. And they had to force him to leave, but he got very violent. And so when we talk about law enforcement and funding, we also have to talk about, like, what's the training that happens for that? Because people are crazy on meth. I've never, like, really seen anybody on meth, but I hear people telling me about so-and-so came over here and they were on meth and this is what happened. We have houses throughout every one of our cluster housings that are boarded up because of meth. We have people that are getting evicted because they're making meth or they're selling meth from their housing houses. Down in Sharp's Corner, we have some people selling skips. What happens? In Evergreen, they're selling skips. They're selling meth. They're selling marijuana. They're selling cocaine. They're selling heroin, whatever. But what happens? I've been to a lot of meetings. I've sat in 2 district meetings, or 2 meetings where the U.S. attorney people came to talk to us about what they're going to do in regards to our drug problems or whatever, corruption on the reservation. And I don't even believe them. I listened to them last week too. I don't even believe them. I don't believe they're going to do anything. And I think about what Puri was saying. It's like the solution has to be from us. And we have to learn to deal with our relatives. And we have to do something about it. But at the same time, when we try to do something about it, then we have things that come into play like, oh, they have rights. You can't make them do that. You can't do that. You can't make them go to treatment. You can't make them do this. You can't make them do that. I'm like beyond the part of my life where I make an excuse or justify somebody's behavior because I'm tired of it. You know, my granddaughters know that person who's selling those skips down in Sharp's Corner. They took me there, showed me. I know who that is. But nobody cares. I mean, you could call the cops. What they gonna do? Go over there? Probably not. Call the feds. What they gonna say? Oh, we have to have an informant go over and buy or something before something gets done. And the state says you're a sovereign nation, so solve your own problems. So I don't know. I'm really probably negative Nancy on this issue, and I get really, really crabby about it because I think it's hogwash, and I think that I'm sick and tired of people taking up for those that are and protecting and shielding people who are harming us in our communities. And I'm sick and tired of people who are cowards who cannot stand up and say, hey, I did that. I was the one that did that, and own their actions. So I'm sorry, I kind of don't really have a solution other than that people should sober up. And people who sell that stuff, they should stop selling it or they should go somewhere else. I do agree with Tribal Council on that one. They should go live somewhere else and go be someone somewhere else, because we got lives to live here, and we have children to raise. So, sorry.
Thank you, Margaret. And this time I'd like to very warmly welcome Red Dawn Foster to the panel. Red Dawn is a candidate on the Democratic ticket for the position of State Senator from Legislative District 27. I want to give you the opportunity for an opening statement, since you haven't made one. And then if you want to take you know, a shot at either of those last 2 questions,
Sure.
you're more than welcome.
Well, thank you. Madakiapi, Chaje Michwaki, Red Dawn Foster, Imachapi, Chante Washte, Nape Chiuzape. Hello, thank you everybody for your patience with me and coordinating this. Thank you, Tom, and my fellow candidates for giving me the opportunity to come speak. I'm Red Dawn Foster. I'm Oglala Lakota, born for Kia'ani. My Teoshpai is an Alshan Teoshpai. So my main reason why I'm running is just because if you look at the state of affairs, both economically, environmentally, Indigenous rights, there is definitely a deficiency. And I feel that as an Indigenous woman, an Oglala, and Navajo, I bring a different worldview to a lot of these issues that we have been speaking about today to address them. And as a South Dakotan, I think that I bring a lot to the table with a undergrad in political science and a master's in business, as well as, again, very strong proponent of tribal sovereignty and their right to self-determination. So that's one of the things that I feel is important, is that not only as a South Dakotan, but as an indigenous Oglala Lakota, that I can bring that worldview and then also my understanding of tribal sovereignty and their right to self-determination to also protect those rights. I will first address the gaming question. I 100% support tribal right to economic development through gaming. And if I am elected, I will continue the efforts to oppose the expansion for Port Yankton's casino and continue to support the tribal gaming rights in the state and at every level. As far as the opioid epidemic, I think Pari had it correct that this is definitely a complex issue. You can't just address it by saying we should throw them in jail or anything, but looking at both the environment, looking at the lack of employment opportunities, as well as all of the other social ills that many suffer from, but also prevention, looking at alternative medicines to addressing some of these pain issues that opioids are prescribed for, and then also treatment, looking at trauma-informed treatment centers and going a holistic approach. So it definitely is a complex, situation, and we will have to work together as a community, state, and tribe to address this issue. So.
Thank you. It's 6:05 now, 6:07 actually, and there are still a number of things that we haven't touched on, whether it be how the state and the tribes can work together on infrastructure, the whole issue of economic development, and the same question I asked about whether education on the reservations should matter to the state or not. I guess the whole question of economic development and a 40 to 80% unemployment, is that acceptable in tribal nations? Is it acceptable to the rest of the state? These are questions that could be asked. The area of child protection services, we got to such a point in the state that there was 2 or 3 tribes that filed suit against the state of South Dakota because they were taking children from Native families without really an initial hearing and taking them for 60 to 90 days. And they filed suit against the state. And they won that suit. I don't know where it is today. But when we talk about working together, obviously if you have to go to a court and file suit against the state of South Dakota for practices, they're not honoring the Indian Child Welfare Act, which is a federal law. They're not honoring that, and they are not according Native people rights, especially with children and their children and families. That's a position of, it's kind of an adversarial position rather than figuring out ways to work together. So those are all issues. They're out there on the table. We're at a point where we need to close. I'm going to give an opportunity for each person for a closing statement. I'm going to start with Pari and move that way. So Pari, you got the ball.
Closing statement?
Yeah. And if you want to include...
Asking us a huge compound question of many topics.
No.
I was waiting on, hold on.
No. That's why it wasn't a question. It was just that these are subjects that we still could talk about. Mm-hmm. But so I'm just throwing them out on the table. You don't even have to touch that ball. You can just make your closing statement. If you want to touch any of those issues.
I feel like I'm being set up. I think we're all being set up with that closing. Well, Tom.
I'm just, maybe I was framing your closing statement.
Oh, okay, frame the closing statement, unemployment and ICWA. Okay. I just think it comes down to representation and sovereignty. Sovereignty is a big issue, and I think we have to look at ourselves, look at what we do, what our actions are, what we think, what we learn, the information that we listen to. Are we listening to each other? Do we understand multiple perspectives in an issue, and are we making informed decisions? Is our sovereignty strong? Is it as strong as a piece of paper, or is it strong as a pillar that holds up a nation? I think that's the underlining issue. Jobs, economics, sovereignty, job security. But if you talk about jobs and unemployment rate, then you also have to talk about workforce development. You have to get at the underlining issues of why people cannot hold a full-time job. What are their options? How do I better my condition? And do I have access to a route to better my condition? I think those are framing questions. And I feel that if we had better economic sovereignty, better food sovereignty, better nation sovereignty as a whole, and health sovereignty. I mean, we have these huge pillars that are so weak, and they're supposed to hold up our nation. But all that has to do with all these other symptoms: drug, unemployment rate, lack of state governments respecting our sovereignty. And we have to be vigilant, excuse me. We have to be alert, and those who can have to do. You can't know better and not do better. And that means you need to get out and vote. And that means you need to put your petition in and run. And that means you need to be active in your community. And that all comes to being a good relative. Are we accountable to each other? Are we accountable to our elders? Are we taking care of our elders? Are we taking care of our kids, our youth, our nieces, our nephews, our grandchildren? Being a good relative, and that starts every day, and it's a choice every day when you get out of bed and you get your coffee and your oatmeal on the stove and you get ready to start your day. Are you being a good relative? What good are you doing to contribute to our nation, to our people, to our district, and to our state? So I feel like I incorporated your closing statement, Tom. So thank you very much. Please vote. Please register to vote. Exercise your rights. Our ancestors fought and sacrificed and suffered for us to have rights, and so did our veterans. We have a lot of veterans out there who are listening. And being a U.S. Navy veteran myself, and being overseas, and being away from my family and making that sacrifice, I understand what it feels like to sweat blood, sweat and tears, to really have your rights, your freedom of speech, and your ability to vote. So I encourage everybody in your families and your communities, be a good relative and make sure everybody's registered to vote and that they get out there. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Prairie. Bill?
Tom, how to solve all these problems? Infrastructure, economic development, child protection. I think it starts back with the children, and we've got to care. We've got to care about it. Our church participates in a program called the Backpack Program, where we furnish backpacks of food that kids take home Thursday evening when they leave home, because they're not going to have enough food over the weekend. And a child who's hungry has a hard time learning. That's just one little, nearly inconsequential thing, but we've got to start somewhere. And I think it starts with the children. You're going to get tired of me referring back to the Bible probably, but there's a statement in the book of Judges. It said, "Then a generation grew up who knew not the Lord." And we've started that in the United States of America in 1964. And until we come back to knowing who can solve our problems, because we can't. I'll be frank with you, we can't. We can work on symptoms, but there's only one who can solve the problems. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Bill. Over to you, Margaret.
When I think about solving problems, I think about my grandpa. And my grandpa used to say to us kids all the time that the Creator, He gave you 2 feet, He gave you 2 hands, and He gave you an azula to think with. And so when I think about that, I too go back to education and ask questions about how are we teaching our children to think. I look at myself as a parent and say, what am I doing to encourage my son to solve problems, to solve his own problems, and how am I as a parent enabling him and solving his problems for him. Him and I have a hard time sometimes because I want him to learn how to do that. And I also want to not see him struggle and suffer. And as a mom, I want to make that better for him. But I know that I'm not, or I won't. The other thing that I was thinking about, as I was thinking about my closing statement, is that I wrote down some different information in regards to active voters and inactive voters. And I was looking at all of District 27, except for I didn't include the 3 precincts of Pennington County because I didn't have time to try to figure out how to separate those out and to get their totals. But when I think about who's active and who isn't active, and then we think about people saying that there's not a lot of people, like we're inactive people, we're not registered to vote. And when I go and look at the information that's provided by the state with their quick facts, we actually have 12,740 active voters in this district. We have 1,283 inactive voters, totaling 14,023. Altogether, according to the state statistics, we have 15,081 eligible voters. So we're missing somewhere 1,058 people. And so it sounds like both people, both sides of the aisle or whatever, are doing a pretty good job of getting out there and registering voters. When I look at Oglala Lakota County, you have 7,782 active voters, and there's 889 inactive voters. So what are those 889 inactive voters doing? Hawken County, you have 1,371 active voters, and you have 38 inactive voters. Gee, wouldn't we like to have that statistic? Jackson County, you have 1,771 active voters, and you have 152 inactive voters. In Bennett County, you have 1,816 active voters, and then you have 204 inactive voters. So my question is, what's wrong in Oglala Lakota County? Our population in Oglala Lakota County is 14,354. In Hawken County, there's 1,943 people in that county. Jackson County, 3,289 people. Bennett County, you have 3,454. So those are good questions that we have to ask ourselves, and we have to ask our relatives and look around and try to figure out, well, what's happening with this 889 inactive voters? And if you're inactive, you probably have to check again too, because you might have been removed from the voter roll because the Secretary of State says if your last election that you voted in was for Barack Obama, you're probably not registered to vote anymore. And so sometimes we think that we're registered to vote and you're not registered to vote. And I wanted to acknowledge Steve Hernandez over here. He's been working really, really hard as one of our outreach workers to get people registered to vote. And Emily Bullbear, I'm not sure where she went, but she's another one, working really hard to get people registered to vote. And so the responsibility, when we talk about sovereignty and all of that, that responsibility falls on us. We're the ones. I can think of someone right now that is an inactive voter. And I'll probably be calling that person after this is done to say, how come you're an inactive voter? But there's a responsibility that we all have to ourselves and to each other and to the future. And if we choose to be inactive, then we suffer the consequence of that being inactive. Because in Oglala, Lakota County, there's 14,354 of us. We are the largest county in District 27. And we should have better representation for that number. Maybe next time I'll get into like the actual voter turnout. I'll come with those statistics, Tom. I'll impress you. Anyways, I want to thank you guys for listening. I want to thank Oglala Lakota College for having this forum. I want to thank Keeley Radio and KOLC TV for showing and airing. I want to thank my fellow candidates. It was really a good day of discussion, and I really appreciate it. And I want to thank everybody out there listening. And then I'm just going to borrow some of Puri's words. Let's get registered to vote and get out there to vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. We'll pass the microphone over to Red Dawn Foster.
Thank you. I am honored and humbled to be running for State Senate in District 27. To follow the footsteps of both Kevin Killer and Senator Kevin Killer and former Senator Teresa Tubles is such an honor to be able to continue the work that they've started. Teresa Tubles is really a true pioneer, and she had inspired me when she ran the first Native woman to win Senate. And she had said, I created this path, now it's time for others to follow. And that inspired me at that moment. I knew that, I always knew I was going to come back home and work for my people, but I guess I didn't see that I was going to be running for state senate. I thought maybe I'd be registering voters like I did for Daschle and door knocking for Herset and also working on Kevin's campaign. So I'm really, really honored to be a part of this experience. And as Indigenous people, we have a unique, not only responsibility to vote for our children and protect our tribal sovereignty, but we have a really exciting, unique opportunity right now that we've never had before. We have 8 Native candidates in the state of South Dakota running. We have Alexandra Fredericks for Secretary of State, amazing, strong, passionate, brilliant young woman. Her husband, Wayne Fredericks, is running for the PUC, Public Utilities Commission. That is such an important position. Imagine having an Indigenous man in that position. We'd get information of who's trying to put a pipeline here. We'd have information of who's wanting to mine. I mean, looking at these really complex issues that affect Indigenous people. We have Ali Moran running for Senate in District 28. We have Faith Spotted Eagle running in 31. We have, my 2 colleagues here. So we have 3 Indigenous candidates in District 27. We've never before had that opportunity. So I feel that as Indigenous people, not only is it our responsibility and an opportunity, but we no longer have the luxury of not voting. We have people who will actually represent and fight for our worldview, what's important to us, and our sovereignty. And I think that, I know that a lot of people feel that it's not worth voting because we don't get the representation. It doesn't really make a difference, but it does. And we got to protect our water. We got to protect our children. We got to protect our natural resources. Looking at our economy right now, I think that the Republican Party in South Dakota is playing a horrible, horrible game, representing they're looking at Washington. They're playing Washington politics. South Dakota needs to be for South Dakotans, looking at our farmers. They're struggling. Look at the tariffs that are happening. It's impacting that. our farmers. We have the interest rates are increasing as well as labor costs. So I think that it's time to flip South Dakota, get some blue people, get some blue candidates in office, indigenous blue candidates in office, and say that we're ready to work together for all South Dakota. We understand what a responsibility is to our farmers, protecting our water, our land, our economy. We have educated people that are ready to support these efforts. And I just hope that everyone gets registered, and I want to thank you for this opportunity and humbly ask for your vote on November 6th. Thank you.
Thank you, Red Dawn. Liz?
Thank you, Tom, and to all the other candidates running. I look up and I look down this table, and I don't see parties. Kevin Keller and I, we didn't know one another from Adam when I first got elected. And I think we were good for one another. I helped him and he helped me. One of the main problems in politics is the parties. And what are the parties? The parties are supposed to be about certain platforms. We can all agree on that. And you know, I talked to some of my Republican colleagues. Well, you know, we had our convention this summer. What do you think about the platform? They've never read the platform. They don't know what the platform is. And you can do the same thing with the Democratic side, too. Most people don't know what's in the platform. They're just this or they're that. And I always told everybody, you know, I'm a hard-working woman, but I'm American first. And that doesn't have any kind of boundaries. And so I'm kind of known for a rabble-rouser in my party. They don't just always agree with me. Matter of fact, they probably don't agree with me most of the time. But we had formed, I had formed a small caucus down there, and we started with, there was 4 of us, and over the years, and we've grown to 20, and we just met at lunch, go over bills, and, you know, we all had the same kind of thought process and how we wanted to move legislation. And my Republican colleagues took the brunt of that storm for me doing that. We started being a threat with inside the machine, which is the establishment in Pierre. And so they got together, all the leadership, and drew up a pledge letter. And in order to receive PAC money for your campaigns, or to be considered for any chair positions or whip positions, you had to sign the pledge. And you had to have it back by a certain date. I can't remember what the date was now, but I missed it. So I think it's important for when you're running for office, you know, understand your platforms and what you represent. I don't represent any particular party. I don't represent a Republican Party. I don't represent a Democrat Party. I represent people. And the only part that you really need to be concerned with is your platforms. And the platforms definitely separate us. And are they major things? Absolutely not. But I would argue that that's kind of what has got us into this position that we're in with the country as a whole on this division. I can guarantee you the 5 of us sitting here could get more done in an hour than 105 can get done in 20 years in Pierre. And it's the reason is party affiliations, we don't work with one another anymore. And if somebody like Kevin Keller and I can come together and find common ground and pass legislation and do it proudly and honestly, there's no reason that all of us shouldn't be able to do that. I can honestly say, no matter who wins these races, I look down this table and I feel well represented. So I think it's important for young people to get the information and know your candidates, ask them the questions that you want to know. You can ask me, and sometimes my bluntness sets people back, but I find it to be very refreshing. I'd rather be told the truth than to be not told the truth. And so I just want to I really appreciate everybody, and this isn't easy. And Perry, you did a wonderful job, and I remember the first time I was here, and I was so nervous. I had not a clue what to say, and you did a wonderful job. You gals did a great job, and Bill, and I'm going to look into a new business, cleaning chicken coops, because it's not tax, it's tax exempt. Who knew? Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Liz. There's a we're done, and we're not. There's a question that came in that there's some demand to throw out there on the table, whether, and this is voluntary, who wants to deal with it. There has been an issue. It's been there for a long, long time, but it's jumped up in other places around the country, and that's gerrymandering. It's an issue that went to court, and there was a suit with the idea of dealing with the whole issue of gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is a practice or a process of recarving the district boundaries to benefit one party or the other. And the question is, where do we stand today here in South Dakota in the issue of gerrymandering? Can we do anything about it? Can we deal with the impact? I know for years the U.S. Civil Rights Organization has been involved in monitoring the districts are redrawn every 10 years based on the census. And for years, the U.S. Civil Rights Organization was here in the state monitoring how those districts were redrawn and whether they were fairly redrawn, with the idea that there would be as much Native American representation in the state legislature as possible. Anybody have a comment about that?
I'll just make a quick comment on that, Tom. I think Maggie pretty much, as far as District 27 is concerned, I think Maggie's statistics from the SOS office on, the number of voters, and I don't see that in 27, but I hear complaints about it. I haven't studied it enough in the state of South Dakota to know how the other areas are divided. I know 26A, which is next door, is huge. It's like all of Mission, all of Millette, it goes up White River, it goes up to all the way, I think, up to the Cheyenne River, and then clear over on the other side of Chamberlain. So it's a huge, huge area. But the concentrations are Chamberlain. You've got all the little towns in there. Then you have Lower Brule is in there. But then you get down here, and then you've got Mission. So, I don't know how they figure that. And but there's been enough concern about it over the years that I definitely think it's something that, we need to keep an eye on. And the other thing is, that's why the census is important, and making sure you get
counted.
Get counted. If you don't get counted, it's hard to make the argument then when they go to redistricting. So I think as far as District 27, I'm sure there'd be some people maybe argue with me, probably on my side, that it took in too much of the Democratic part, but I don't know. I'm a Republican. I've been elected. I don't feel like we've I don't feel disenfranchised from the way it's,
The accusation is that the Republican Party in the state has
well, the Republican,
gerrymandered
yeah, the Republican
districts.
Party in this state is, got some issues, Tom. There, I mean, that's quite obvious. And so we've had 16 years of the same thing. And so we have an opportunity this fall to pick from 2 new candidates. You know, I've worked with both of them.
Are you campaigning for a candidate for governor?
I'm not publicly, no. But
I'm just throwing that out there.
But you have to be concerned with the politics and the position that we are in after 16 years of the 2 last administrations.
Okay.
And I mean, I'm not going to stick up for them because I have a lot of issues with how a lot of things have been handled with in the party, and that's why I didn't sign the pledge and why I'm out the door on that. So,
Thank you, Liz. Anybody else have a comment on that?
So there is gerrymandering that is happening, and there is definitely voter suppression that's happening in South Dakota. I think that the best thing that we can do to make sure our voice is heard is just to really register to vote. You can go to dmv.org and check your voter registration and also see where your voter precinct is located at. So as much information as we can do as individuals, that's the only way we can really combat that. So until that changes, I just collectively tell your neighbor, give your neighbor an offer to drive to the precincts, do the research, make sure you're registered to vote, because in order for us to make sure our voice is heard, individuals here need to actually get out there and vote. And the state's not going to make it easier for us.
Okay, thank you, Red Dawn. Anyone else?
I'll take it. I just want to add to that, gerrymandering is an issue, voter suppression, like Red Dawn said. The only way that you can be in the political arena and make change is you have to have one or two things. You have to have money, and if you don't have money, you have to have the numbers. So our area here, we don't have the money. We don't have the resources. We have to have the numbers. Our voice isn't going to be loud enough if we don't solidify our vote, if we don't band together and sing the same song and drum to the same beat. It's just gerrymandering and voter suppression is a symptom of the real problem, which is lack of representation. So I appreciate that question, whoever answered it, but it all comes down to unifying our vote so we could have adequate representation at those state tables.
Thank you, Pri.
I just wanted to add to Liz's voice in regards to gerrymandering. I worked in Rapid City area schools, and I was talking about that earlier about where the Native American population exists within Rapid City. And you go into Rapid City and you go into their political realms of precincts and voting, and you'll find that it's gerrymandered heavily. So the Native American that's in Rapid City, they could be 45% of the population up there, but they don't get no representation because of the way things are cut up.
The districts have been carved up.
Yep. And so I would say that, and I agree with Liz, that if I'm elected, that in 2020, if we end up going through a re-election process and I get re-elected, that would be something that I would be fighting for my relatives in Rapid City and my relatives in Sioux Falls. My dad is a member of the Flandreau Santee Sioux tribe. I have relatives that live in the Yankton Sioux tribe. I have relatives up in Sisseton-Wapton. I have relatives over in Rosebud. I have relatives in Crow Creek. I have relatives in Laura Brule. I have relatives all over the state. And so I would be fighting for that for them, to make sure that they have a voice and representation. at one point in time, we should probably even have a constitutional conversation about how you're supposed, if you're paying taxes, you're supposed to have representation. So we should have a right to vote or to participate and to represent. And so I think that's really important, and I wanted to thank Liz for talking about that, because it's true. It's that whatever's happening over there, and I'm glad that she's willing to say that's not her as a Republican, it's them other Republicans or whatever. And however this election turns out, and if I manage to be there, if Liz is there, or if Puri is there and Liz is there, I'm hoping that they would be able to work on that issue and make sure that Native Americans are represented throughout this state, and they have the right to run for representation too. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Margaret. With that, that's going to be a wrap. I want to thank each candidate who came today. Liz May, Puri Puyer, and Margaret Ross are candidates for the State House. Steve Livermont also is a candidate. He's not here tonight. I want to thank Bill Hines and Red Dawn Foster, who are candidates for the State Senate. The election is Tuesday, November 6th. You have until October 22nd to get registered. So if you're not registered to vote, get registered. And Steve Hernandez, we're going to try and visit with Steve a little bit here to find out where people can get registered between now and October 22nd. Early voting will start on September 21st. There'll be an opportunity ahead of time. So if it's more convenient for you to go vote on between then and Election Day, if you're not going to be around Election Day, then there's an early voting opportunity here in Oglala, Lakota County. I want to thank very much Michelle May and Sharon and Tawa Dushno here at the Woksape Teepee. Thank them for their work. Thank Tony Brave and Rich White for their work with KOLC. And I want to thank each candidate who came. And I want to thank each listener who was out there and who stayed on task and listened to the candidates. That's what I encourage you more than anything else, that when, not if, but when you go to the polls, you make an informed decision. My point is that that is your responsibility as a member of this nation, and I think you should be held to that. We thank you very much. This has been broadcast live on Keeley FM radio. For Keeley News and Public Affairs, this is Tom Casey. We'll send it back to Porcupine Butte and wish you a very good evening.